Hi, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Ask T3. I'm your host, Nick Bailey, Chief Real Estate Officer with T360. And thanks for joining us. This podcast is about the real estate industry where we ask big questions and get smart answers. And we will get some smart answers today, I know. So whether you're joining us via Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, make sure you're part of the conversation. Go to askt3.com, ask us a question, make a comment, give us an episode idea. But we'd love to hear from you. Okay, so for today's topic, the headlines are everywhere. What's happening with the economy? It feels like it's changing by the day. How is it affecting residential real estate? Do we have a soft landing, a hard landing coming, no landing at all? To answer those questions, we have one of the leading economists in the real estate industry joining us here today, Dr. Skylar Olsen. Skylar, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. You most recently served as the chief economist of Zillow Group, and I know you're the founder of Reimagine Economics, and you've got all kinds of things going. But let's start. Like, what's your high level? You know more of the detail than probably anyone out there. Give us the high level of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, high level what's happening, probably uncertainty would be the word of the year. And that means, a lot of things are starting to change. I'd say if you look at US housing, what we've got is a pretty slow moving market, right? New listings are still slow to return and home values are beginning to fall. But if I start dividing the US apart and I start looking, say, at the Northeast versus the Southeast, they are very different pictures, right? So the US as a whole looks, slow moving, but we've got some areas where home values are up over 7% over the year and other areas where home values are down 7%.
So when you say house prices are falling, some may interpret this and say, Dr. Skylar says the housing market is about to crash.
Yeah.
Is it?
Well,
what's your thought?
No. The word crash, no, right? But if you imagine what happened after the pandemic, think of the pandemic shock as the first boulder that splashed into the lake, right? And what we'll experience moving forward is a lot of ripples. So let's take it to the whole economy right now and think about what's going on. We've got weird numbers that seem to suggest it's okay, right? At the last jobs report that came out, unemployment rate fell again. We've got steady and stable inflation. The Fed came out and said, hey, these sorts of readings doesn't lead us to say that we'll drop rates soon. But yet behind the scenes, a lot of anxiety, right? We've got folks that are reporting in a lot of these consumer sentiment surveys that they expect less jobs to be available in the 6 months to come. So even if right now it's looking stable, the anxieties about the future are big. And that weighs heavily on buyers who are making huge financial decisions to lock in over into the future, right? So I think on net, you've got a lot of hesitation on buyers to accept exceptionally high prices. And you've also got, some areas where owners are still holding tight, right? And that's making a pretty different experience across the US.
So you touch on something that I always find interesting, which is this anxiety that seems to almost be a facade to the truth of the numbers and the data that's backing up what's really happening. What would your advice be to people if they find themselves in that spot to say, gosh, housing seems crazy, or we don't know what's going on, but then you start looking at some of the data components behind it, say, actually, there's a lot of good things going on too. How should someone think about that? What's your advice?
Yeah, I think generally we got to get personal, right? When we're starting to give those advice. First step in getting personal in housing is get local, right? And so the advice that I would have would actually differ a lot if, say, I was let's get some exceptional examples here. My advice would differ a lot if, say, I was in an area like Austin And I'm going to choose another place where home values are falling, but it's a bit of a different picture. So let's choose something similar, but say Raleigh. Okay. So in both cases, home values are pretty soft. We have negative year-over-year numbers, but in a place like Austin, I have more new listings than, pretty back on par to pre-pandemic. So there's opportunities flowing from owners, right? So in a place like Austin, this might be an area where, you'll have better bargaining power as a buyer, but you'll want to be making the match to the right neighborhood where you want to stay. And there are opportunities to choose from. Now, that's a bit different, perhaps, than, say, a place like Raleigh, right, where we are seeing some recovery in new listings, but it's not that extra supply that's bringing those prices down. I think it's a little bit more about price hesitation, right? Really high levels of listings with price cuts. Raleigh was a booming market, right? In terms of people moving during the course of the pandemic, remote work. It's still going to have long legs because of its affordability and its proximity to a lot of job generators, right? The research triangle down there. But in the meantime, those prices, are extraordinary. And people aren't as willing to accept that if mortgage rates remain up where they are, right? That makes the monthly affordability challenging. But also, if I expect prices to fall, the investment potential of that home purchase is not quite as there. Now, I'm not saying don't buy a home in Raleigh. There are lots of reasons we buy a home, right? A lot of the reasons, some home listings are generational opportunities to get into that neighborhood, right? Or a house that has a potential for you. So if it's about access, right? A less competitive market, that bodes really well, but then you need to be the kind of buyer who really wants to stay for a long period of time, and that means you need to be job stable, life stable, and that's cooling off Raleigh, right? So that's an example of two markets that look cool, right? Home prices are soft and falling, and price cuts are high, but it might be driven by different dynamics, right? And then
And
you have examples where things are just hot. So
what before I ask the next question, what's your hottest market, which you mentioned with the highest year-over-year increases?
yeah, so here
Number one.
what I'm drawing on this data, I'm drawing on Zillow's home value index. We're looking at price home value changes over the year. The big winners are your Syracuse, New York, your Rochester, and Scranton, PA. And all of those metro areas, you're thinking, up in the Northeast, really low levels of listings from existing owners, and yet they have considerable job growth, or have continued to have considerable job growth more in these areas, and they're incredibly affordable. Prices are growing over 6% in these areas. Now, I think if you look at the Midwest, it's also easy to find other examples that are experiencing similar dynamics to a lesser degree, affordable, more economically stable. And here you're looking at Ohio is a good picture, but
Like
also,
Toledo, isn't Toledo's ranking up there, which is
yeah,
a shock.
we have here Youngstown and Cleveland for those in Ohio. And then don't forget, Chicago and Madison are up there at 4%. And then long having been some of the hottest markets are actually your Hartford and Providence, right? Right pinched in between Boston and New York, affordable and yet such access. But New York itself is also appreciating. So we've got a split in the US, right? A lot of southern states that experienced a lot of that boom in the pandemic. People were retiring, moving up. Rates were so low. If you at that time wanted to sell in the next 5 years and buy a new one, you would have moved up that plan, right? We had lots of home sales. People were moving down south and prices exploded. That price might not necessarily carry. This is the ripple in the pond. Now, you said the word crash. Crash would imply, a real price correction. When you look at these time series, it looks, a ramp up in the pandemic, a big softening, and here more of that kind of ripple pattern. So in the long run, I think most housing economists are still comfortable saying we will return to, kind of more average, steady growth on average.
Yeah, I agree with you. I still look at even having a shortage of homes in the estimated 4 to 5 million range. You have
Yeah.
more young people, multi-generational living with parents. And so I think there is pent-up demand. We just need a few
Yes.
levers to hit. Now, let me ask you
Yeah.
this. Is there any correlation? Because a few years ago, you talk about kind of that pandemic surge.
Yeah.
I remember reporting on some areas that had never hit double-digit price appreciation
Mhm.
to the levels they did. Your Boise, Idaho, Salt
Yeah.
Lake City, areas in
Yeah.
Florida and Texas.
Yes.
There were just some of these areas. Are you seeing a correlation in some of those areas that now are showing softening because they were the highest
Yeah.
buildup?
Yeah, exactly. I think that that is a relationship that you can see. Some of the places that were the hottest booming areas continue to now be the softest. And again, it's that, that price didn't carry, because what has to hold up the price is also the buying power of the people, right? And incomes have been strong in a lot of these areas, right? A lot of folks would have moved in some cases with higher incomes. If I, as a tech person, I earn more on average, right? I move to a lower, more affordable locale. I might bring my higher income with me, right? So a lot of that is sustainable price growth, right? That really pushes it up. Right now, what's really driving prices is the wax and wane of owners, right? Their comfort listing. We've got a lot of owners still holding on to those homes. New listings are down. Let's see, I wrote this one down. New listings are still down 20% from normal pre-pandemic. So that's
Yeah.
fewer opportunities, even as inventory rises, right? Inventory is rising because buyers are backing off, right? That new listing recovery, we've been pretty stable at around 20% down now for a long while, right? But
And
inventories are rising.
you talk about price cuts. I mean, tell me
Hmm.
if you agree or not with this. And you talk about the very localized nature of some markets are up, some are kind of flat,
Yeah,
and others can be softening a little bit.
yeah,
And at the same time, I think a lot of sellers, especially some that I've seen in the market that I live, are overpriced. It's almost if
yeah,
they're trying to keep up with the national average versus saying, I may need to tone it down in my local market. So, would
yeah,
you agree that there is confusion between what's a softening in the market and what
yes.
is too many listings coming in with a high hopes and overpricing and not even being in their
Yeah.
range? And how do we balance those two?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the powers of, building market data into your practice as an agent, because you can help make it real what's happening in your local market. We do just hear national headlines and they come all the way down to our local area, right? And people kind of get swept away with that larger narrative. So if you have a practice of following any of the, a lot of the real estate portals offer kind of market update dashboards on redfin.com's data center, zillow.com/research, right? You can kind of help bring the seller along, I think, is important. Now, I totally understand where it's hard for sellers, a lot of which we have kind of the bulk of potential sellers right now tend to be older generations facing retirement. They have a, anxiety to, get as much out of their home sale as possible to take them, to the end of the road in dignity, right? So I think there's a lot of pressure to do that. We also, as individuals, find it a lot harder to lose, right? And I think people just assume that that was, their price and they got to keep it. It went up to this amount and, you just don't understand. And so talking about data and showing people what's happening locally, I think is a really powerful way to present yourself as a market expert so that then this owner can trust that you are providing the right advice. Um, I'll also say to your audience, if this is helpful, the other thing I like to point out, you can find this data, both kind of data types on Redfin right now, where you're looking at what is the days on market of homes that went pending versus the age of inventory, right? So in other words, of homes that went pending, they stayed, according to Zillow, on the market for 36 days, right? However, if I look at the market right now and I just jump on look at the homes that are on Redfin, the average home will have been there for 56 days, right? So more homes are lingering. The successful ones tend to sell faster. A good agent can help you price appropriately so you can sell on your timeline. And we are at the close of, well, not the close. Mortgage rates, if they drop again, can create their own
I
seasonality.
was going to say, come on,
But
everyone wants to know what's Dr.
totally.
Skylar's crystal ball. July is iffy. Like,
Whew.
are we
Yeah.
with the jobs report? Where are we not going to get a rate cut? Are we going to get a rate cut? What do
I
you think?
don't I listened to Chairman Powell's remarks, of course. Everyone's kind of, and what you're listening for is not just what they say, but the tone and tenor, and you're looking for if there was a change in any of those kind of signals. And the last time he spoke, he talked to what we talked about earlier, this strength behind the numbers in the economy, and kind of not in that way being forced to kind of lower those interest rates, right? As everything in that sense holds. If you think about what is the Fed trying to do? Low unemployment and keep inflation at 2%. If this is where they are, there's not as much of a push to change, especially if there's an anxiety about, honestly, a lot of policy changes on a federal level that lots of people aren't sure how they will shake out or if they will happen, right? And, tariffs, things like that.
So you talked about it, this kind of anxiety and people being unsure is the thing that we're sure about the most is the people being kind of unsure about things.
Yeah.
But then we also, on another hand, talk about the data behind this. So is now a good time to buy? Even though affordability is tough.
Yeah.
Should people really be nervous, or is that just a little bit of headlines and too much information?
Yeah. One, I think, again, it matters a lot where you are, right? In terms of how I would give that advice, how comfortable I would feel telling someone and suggesting like a more blanket statement, oh yeah, now's a good time to buy. One, I'll say we all buy for lots of different reasons, right? So I might want to access this neighborhood, that school district. There is this home that is uniquely available where I can put in that garden. I'm staring out, looking at my ranch style home that's U-shaped, and I put an outdoor living room in between in that middle of the U. I mean, this is my castle, right? So we have a vision we can't do other ways. In that case, you're watching inventory, right? And the right time to buy is when you find something that matches you. And so long as you are working with a great, well-informed, vetted agent who is able to help you strategically approach this market, I say that's, the decision for you, right? Move forward because it's all about the match in home buying. If you want to stay and if you have something in particular you're looking for, these are housing markets are, again, these listings are often, once in generational opportunities sometimes. Now, for those that are looking for, what I want out of my home purchase is my nest egg to grow, my wealth to grow. And I need affordability in order to save and then have my wealth to grow. And I'm in an area where home values are falling. I would say to that person, it is maybe a more challenging time right now to think that you will get what you want out of that decision. Now, again, I'm gonna
move to
or different place, right? Like if you want investment out of your real estate purchase, you need to go to the places that are booming and growing, that have affordability, so more people will continue to go there, solid job market. And I think that's what kind of freaks people a little bit out right now about different job markets. If all these policy changes what jobs grow, what places will be the next hotness. But, a lot of the areas that offer affordability, that have, really great current labor markets, I think do offer that. And that's something still alive and well. right? As we mentioned, a place like Syracuse, Rochester, Scranton, Youngstown, even New York, Hartford, and Providence, up 5% over the year. And that first year kickoff, right, of home value growth is a stunning thing.
Well, I like what you said earlier that if you're an agent in your local market, go out and get some research on some of this stuff. Or
Yeah.
how can they rent a mini Dr. Skylar to like set on their shoulder to go on their listing appointments? Because I think that's what
Yeah.
agents are going to want out of this. But
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely. We can talk
how
about
can
in
people
data she
find you?
drops then. Yeah, let's talk about in data she drops.
Yeah, you've
So,
got some new things happening. So how can people
yeah,
follow you? How can they find you? Tell us.
absolutely. Yes. The idea of kind of people needing kind of the interpretation layer on top of the data. What does it mean? Otherwise, it's just a jumble of numbers. That ability to make it real is something I am incredibly passionate about. So we'll have a series of episodes. The show is called In Data She Drops. We'll post it onto YouTube. You'll be able to find it on LinkedIn. I'll share it with you. And our first series is going to cover kind of the changing value of real estate, how it's harder to access, it's less affordable, and it might not offer the same investment potential in certain areas as it did. But importantly, what are the solutions that people are working on in a lot of cool prop tech companies in order to recover and preserve the value that real estate offers? And we'll do, in data she drops, right? So data drops, and what does it mean? And how do you use it? How do you find it? And connect it to our big decisions, make it real. So that's moving forward and something that I do. And then there's, I think to spread the ability to do this, right? Think about it, something really cool happened when Redfin and Zillow went beyond just providing data about individual homes, and they aggregated it and they formed economic research teams that could then explain our markets. Something cool happens. And that cool behavior, that cool program should be in more prop tech companies. I think there's a lot of information out there about how we live our lives and how our experiences are changing, that can really help us make better decisions.
Well, I think everyone agree. You make economics cool.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it
Dr.
is
Skylar
cool.
Olsen.
It's about us.
Look, you get
Yeah.
excited. I can tell.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
make sure follow Skylar. Great information. I followed you for years, and we appreciate you being here today. Great
Yeah.
information.
Thank you so much. And good luck out there. Absolutely.
All right, everyone. Big thanks, Dr. Skylar Olsen, one of the lead residential real estate and prop tech economists. So thrilled to have her join us. Keep an eye out. We've got some hot topics coming up because I think what we heard today is a great example. There's the data and what's really happening, and then there's the headlines and the way people are feeling. And sometimes those two don't match. And that's what Ask T3 is all about. Get to the bottom of it. Let's use the data to back up our decisions, and we'll see you again here next time.